Hey everybody, it's Dan with Philosophical Fishing. Thank you for coming back for another video. It's good to be doing this. It's been a little while since I've made a video. I try to release one every week, but I was on vacation last week and I've been busy with a lot of other stuff behind the scenes. So thank you for being here. I'm really happy to make these videos. As I always say, as long as they're helpful, I'm going to keep making them. And so lately I've been thinking about 8 years ago, I went into treatment on August 13th, so it's been just about 8 years since I entered treatment and came off of all my psych drugs, went through psychosis, went through hell, went through all that stuff that I went through, and I posted a blog yesterday on my website called Waiting in the Fire, because I was reflecting back on what it was like for me when I was so damaged from all the benzos and the psych drugs, and how my life was at that time when it was just basically boiled down to the lowest common denominator, insofar as I kept my social circles very small. I was basically just hanging around with my immediate family, and it was because I really didn't have any mental real estate to give to anything or anybody else. It was basically about self-preservation and self-protection at that point, and it lasted for me for quite a few years before I could really start to venture out more and do some of the other things that I really wanted to, but my nervous system was just not ready to handle yet. And so I was thinking back about when I was in that treatment center down in South Florida in 2015, and after I came off of everything, I was... You can go back and look at my psychosis video or some of the older videos where I talk about that experience in a little bit more detail. But basically, I was in a 150-person, 150-bed facility, and it was small. It was an old folks nursing home that was basically rehabbed into a treatment center. So most of them were, younger people, early 20s, late teens, mid 20s. And if you could picture, it was one long hall. The building was in the shape of a cross. So you entered the front of the building and it was a long hallway, like a long corridor. And it opened up on the right side to a cafeteria. And then it was just rooms all the way down this hallway, all the way down. And then there was a cross section where that was the female wing or whatever, the female hallway, and it was much shorter. So it was a pretty small place, and the grounds were maybe a half an acre, 3/4 of an acre. It was small. 150 of us in there. And now I had just come off of 5 milligrams of Klonopin after 13 years of daily benzo use, Suboxone, Vyvanse, Lamictal, Pristique. And I'm in this place and I was coming apart at the seams. I mean, I was crawling out of my skin. I was going through psychosis. The anxiety was unreal, sky high. And all day and almost all night, there's just people fighting, screaming, yelling at each other, running around like crazy, coming off of all kinds of drugs, detoxing. And it was madness. It was madness at all hours of the day. So many of us packed in there. It was like Lord of the Flies, but everybody's coming off of drugs. It was insane. And I don't know how I got through it. But even going down to the cafeteria to try to get some food in my body was extremely painful. I mean, I was barely holding on to my sanity. Anxious out of my skin, and I'm just a sensory freaking overload. I mean, constantly, and I just wanted to get out of there. I just wanted to escape. And outside of the rehab, there was this little walking trail with like a little stone path, and there was a bench that was kind of like hidden behind these bushes where you could just sit there and you could look at these trees outside, and there was like some bamboo, I think, and it was all just kind of swaying in the breeze. And I would walk this little stone path out behind these bushes, behind these shrubs, where I could get a little momentary peace and sit there for a while and try to just be away from everybody else who was just going crazy in this place. And I would look at the trees. I would spend some time just reflecting, meditating, and I wanted to run. I wanted to flee. I wanted to get away. But where was I going to go? I had no money. I had no ID. I had nothing. I was out of my mind. I couldn't do anything. But that was this little oasis in that place during those 6 or 7 weeks. I think I was there for seven weeks, I think. And I went there as much as I could and sat on this little bench behind the shrubs. And when I got out, it was on a Friday. My sister picked me up and she brought me to her house. Now my wife and my kid, my 4-year-old, lived about 4 hours away on the other side, on the other coast of Florida. I was on the East Coast and I was from the West Coast of Florida. And I just was so damaged inside, and stepping out of that rehab into the real world now was terrifying, because I had so many things going through my head, like, what am I going to do now for money? How am I going to get a job? My teaching career is flushed down the toilet. I can't go back and do that. What am I going to do? And all I could do was just let myself be as damaged as I was, accept it as much as I could. And there was this, I found this little library that was up the road from where my sister lived. And it was out of the way from, the hustle and bustle of where I was on the East Coast of Florida, big city. And I could drive out to this little library, and I would just find a corner in this library, and I would sit there for hours, and I would just pull books off the shelves on spirituality, on world religions, which I had studied all that stuff before. My bachelor's is in philosophy, and I studied world religions. But after the spiritual awakening that I had in the psych ward, I was now interested in this. I had a renewed interest, and I was perusing all these books and doing all this stuff and just sitting in the library at peace. And I remember I was just so, it's like I could breathe, I could exhale in this little corner of the library. And it was quiet and peaceful, and I could finally let my nervous system relax and just take in the moment and be away from this 150 person crazy screaming nutcase frickin' treatment center that I was in. And I just remember being so grateful for that peace and quiet in that library. And I went to that library almost every day, and I would just sit there and I would pull books off the shelf. And it was like a little oasis. It was a little healing place where I could go and just let myself be, and nobody was going to bother me. And I remember that because it was so significant. And I bring that up because when I wrote this blog post yesterday on my website, Waiting in the Fire, I was thinking about what are some of the things that I did when I was waiting in the fire, when I was waiting for all these horrible symptoms that I still had. I was still extremely damaged. It was wretchedly miserable 99.9% of the day. And finding these little oases in the desert like that library, like that corner of the library where I would just pull books off the shelf, and I was integrating the spiritual awakening that I had, and I was reading all these books and getting all these fresh ideas and trying to have an open mind about maybe what happened to me and why this happened to me, and how do I take this experience forward with me and integrate it into my life now. Trying to make sense of this huge momentous thing that had occurred in me. And waiting in the fire, knowing that I'm so damaged and I have no idea when I'm going to get better, or even if I'm going to get better. And it was terrifying and it was scary. And I was clinging to and looking for things that would nourish me during that time. And part of my thought process was, at least if I'm going to make the decision to ride this out, and I'm in this for the long haul, and I made the decision early on that this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. I knew I was in for the long haul. I didn't know how long it was going to be, but I made a commitment and a decision that I was going to follow through, and I was going to do whatever was necessary for me to heal, and I wanted to remain committed to that. And so while I was waiting in the fire, so to speak, I was trying to expand my conscious, dig deeper, find out what were the things inside of me and about me that maybe led me to that moment of going down this path of psychiatry and taking all these pills and going through this rehab experience, going through psychosis. Were there things in me that had to be looked at, that I had to uncover and see what was going on internally in my psyche, in my mental space, that had to be uncovered and dealt with and healed. And part of that was this time that I was spending in the library, where I was just, pulling all these books off the shelf and going through them and highlighting and then reaching out. And for me, it was a very spiritual path for me that I have gone down since coming off of benzodiazepines and psych drugs and alcohol. It's been a very spiritual path because I've found out early on that some of these practices spiritually that I was putting into my life were beginning to work, like meditation, like trying to be of service, and just so many things that I was learning now, and I was seeing clearly for the first times. It was like the veil, was lifted, and I was willing to be honest and look at myself for the first time in my life. Really, really honest with myself to figure out what it was about me that I wanted to change and what needed to be rectified. Those things about me that I really needed to take a look at. I was willing to take a look at for the first time. And so I think this period for us, well, it can be absolutely miserable and absolutely horrifying and terrifying at times. I mean, look, there were many times during my first few years when I wasn't sure, honestly, if I was going to make it. I had still a lot of crazy thoughts going through my head, just the amount of suffering. There were really times when I was not sure if I was going to be able to keep going. So I just want to put that out there and be honest with you guys and tell you that, yes, that's part of the journey for me. That's part of my story. But I guess I had that part of me that wanted to remain committed and focused on healing. I had a daughter to live for. I had a wife to live for. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could do this. And I could also see that I was incrementally, there were things about me that were getting better and things about me that were getting healed. So I hung on to that, and I used that on terrible days when I was in a bad wave to prove to myself that I was healing and I was on the right path. So I just know that when you're going through the first early stages, the first few months or year, or even for like people like me, years of benzo withdrawal, benzo damage, protracted withdrawal, that this can really be a time when, I've talked about this in another video, you're like the bamboo. The first few years you're just growing your roots. You're putting roots down deep into the soil so that when the day comes, maybe years down the road, down the path, you shoot 100 feet up into the sky. And that's exactly what has happened with me. I had to spend the first few years growing deep roots so that when the time finally came that my nervous system was ready, I can take off. And that's the hope that I want to give you today. And I wrote this in my blog yesterday that I was a musician. Well, I still am a musician. I don't play out and play on stage like I used to. But up until the point that I went into rehab, I was playing out. I was playing on stage. I was playing in front of other people. But after, going through benzo withdrawal, I was just like, there's no way I can play in front of people. It's just not going to happen. It was way too anxiety inducing. I wouldn't have been able to handle it. I just physically would not have been able to get on stage and play. And I wrote this in my blog yesterday. It took me 6 years to be able to play guitar in front of somebody. Okay, 6 years. And it was just one other person. It took me 6 years to play guitar and sing in front of one other person. And I'm okay with that today. I'm okay with the fact that it took that long, but it did take that long. And I also wrote that it's only within really the past year, maybe year and a half, that I've really begun to be able to live the life that I wanted to live throughout benzo withdrawal. There were things that I wanted to do, and I just was not able to do that. I wouldn't have been able to do this. I would not have been able to make these videos. I wouldn't have been able to play guitar in front of somebody unless I went through all the time that it took to get to that point. And while I was kind of in this like hibernating stage of my life, I was taking a look at all these things that were kind of the undercurrent of my life, things that were no longer serving me, that I had to get rid of and push to the wayside and cleanse from my spirit and my soul, and learn how to do things differently. You know, like take care of my physical health, take care of my mental health, learn how to draw healthy boundaries between me and people that are just toxic and I don't want to have close proximity with. I've had to learn how to live life completely new again, like an infant, like a baby. And this kind of waiting in the fire hibernation phase of our recovery can really be a learning process where we learn how to do that. We learn how to do these things, you know, and having people in your life who can help mentor you, or working with a benzo coach, can really facilitate that for you. Of course, I mean, I had a lot of mentors in my life, and I always say I'm a product of all the help that I've been given over the years. You know, I did not learn how to do this stuff on my own. I just had to come at it with the willingness to be able to do it. But I've been given so much help, and I hope to do that for you guys and be that help and be a beacon for you guys still going through it. So I hope this video made sense. I hope I was able to articulate it clearly. I love you guys. I love making these videos. If you have any ideas, suggestions for content, please leave me a comment. You can reach out to me, philosophicalfishing.com. Go to my website, philosophicalfishing.com. That's where you can find my coaching. Follow me on Instagram. I also have all my link trees and everything up there for coaching if you're interested. I love you guys. I'll see you in the next video.